My name is Dr. Leela Monroe. I'm 36. I hold a doctorate in biomedical engineering from a state school no one brags about at family dinners. And I spent the last 7 years co-developing a synthetic enzyme that reversed neurodegeneration in early-stage patients. The work saved 6 clinical trial lives. It also got erased from my father's obituary. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and polished ego. My brother sat flanked by 2 attorneys in matching cufflinks. My mother didn't look at me. Not once. Just dabbed her eyes behind oversized sunglasses as if grief made her light sensitive. The judge asked if there were any objections to the ownership of the patent filing. My brother rose, smooth voice full of curated disappointment. She falsified the authorship, Your Honor. She used our father's declining health to claim credit for something she didn't even understand. Laughter from the gallery. Someone actually laughed. And the worst part, it wasn't cruel. It was casual, like they believed it. I stood, didn't raise my voice, didn't plead, just reached into my bag, pulled out a folded paper, and laid it on the microphone stand. It was weathered, official, signed. I'm not here to defend myself, I said quietly. I'm here because the truth is patient, and today it has a witness. The room hushed. They didn't know that the man carrying that truth was already walking down the courthouse hallway. Flashback, the lab that never saw me. The last time I stood in my father's lab, the lights buzzed overhead like they were trying to warn me. The sink still leaked. The centrifuge still groaned at high speeds. And the whiteboard still had his handwriting from a month ago, half equations, half reminders. Remember, Leela said methylations spike after 6 hours, test that. That was the only place he wrote my name. Not in his speeches. Not in the department newsletters. Not even in his biography on the university website. There, he called me his assistant. Technically accurate, emotionally not. I was the one who stayed after hours when he forgot to eat. Who ran simulations when his tremors got worse? Who tracked the enzymatic drift he dismissed as noise and then proved it was signal? I didn't want credit. I wanted to matter. But in our house, attention was a currency. And my brother had the monopoly. I still remember coming down the stairs one morning to find them. Dad Julian and a dean from Stanford, toasting with bitter coffee over Monroe and Son Therapeutics. There was no daughter in that name, just legacy. And a placeholder I was never meant to fill. I didn't speak. Just turned around, went back to the basement, and ran trial 72. It failed again. But failure in science, at least, had integrity. It admitted when something didn't work. People don't. That summer, Dad's health declined faster than anyone was ready for. His voice thinned, his hands shook more. But his pride stayed sharp, sharper than his memory. He forgot where he left his glasses. He never forgot to correct me in meetings, even when I presented our work. "Clarify that, Leela," he'd say mid-presentation, as if you were speaking to someone who actually understands. The team laughed, I smiled, and kept talking, because that's what daughters do when they're trying to build something, even while being dismantled. The night he collapsed in the lab, I caught him before his head hit the floor. He looked at me, eyes cloudy, and asked, "Where's Julian?" I didn't answer, just held his pulse and called 911. Because daughters who build quietly also carry quietly, even when it breaks them. The trial, when truth is edited for performance, the courtroom had no windows, just artificial light and air too cold for July. It smelled like recycled arguments and old polish. And silence, the kind of silence that doesn't wait to hear both sides. Because one has already bought the narrative. Julian sat 3 seats down, flanked by legal muscle in tailored suits. He wore the same cufflinks my father gave him the day he defended his thesis. I wasn't invited to that defense. Too distracting, Dad said. The bailiff called my name, Dr. Leila Monroe, no Ph.D., no lead researcher. Just a title that landed softer than the ones they gave my brother. I stood, walked slowly to the witness stand, boots too loud on polished marble. Every step echoed like a reminder, this is not your arena. The opposing counsel rose, silver-haired, polished. The kind of man who smiled while slicing reputations. Dr. Monroe, he began, emphasizing the title like it was a costume. Could you clarify your actual role in the development of the enzyme now patented under your name? I didn't answer. My lawyer touched my wrist lightly, stay silent. We were waiting for the moment, the one that changes everything. But first, the undoing, the lawyer motioned to the screen. A grainy video flickered to life, familiar setting, the lab. There I was, pixelated, exhausted, voice frayed. You never give me credit for anything. My voice cracked across the speakers, and then my father's, firm but trembling, because you don't deserve it yet. A beat, I looked away from the footage, but the courtroom didn't. They leaned forward, hungry. Back on screen, I snapped. Maybe if I had a different last name, I'd be taken seriously. Cut, end, black screen, no follow-up, no context, no footage of me stabilizing him minutes later. No apology, no final hand squeeze, just the moment they needed, clipped and served. My mother dabbed at her eye with a tissue she hadn't used since entering. Julian adjusted his tie. Someone behind me whispered, entitled. And the part that hurt, it wasn't new, it was familiar. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I had lived worse than this. I had lived it in real time, not on edited replay. The lawyer turned smug. That concludes our evidence for today, Your Honor. The judge didn't look at me, just tapped the papers in front of him. My name was on those documents, but in that room I was a ghost. A claimant. Not a daughter, not a scientist. Just someone in the way. The man who walked in with history. The judge was already speaking. His voice low, even final. He shuffled the documents, tapping them once. A gesture that sounded like a door closing. My throat tightened. Not from fear, not from defeat, but from that hollow knowing they were about to erase me again. And then, the door opened. Not loudly, not with urgency, just a soft, measured creak. The kind that doesn't need permission. Heads turned. But no one spoke, not at first, because the man who stepped in didn't need to announce himself. He was wearing a navy blue blazer. No tie, no briefcase, but pinned to his lapel. The gold circle of the Nobel Prize in Medicine. Professor Emmanuel Reyes. I hadn't seen him in years. But the moment I saw the white of his beard, the way he walked, like memory had weight. I knew, so did Julian, he froze. Even the judge blinked twice, like recalibrating. Reyes walked to the center of the room. No one stopped him, not even the bailiff. He turned toward the bench. Your Honor, he said, his voice like carved oak. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I can offer clarity. Not speculation, not sentiment, but documentation. He turned to me, not with pity, with recognition, with history. I am here, he said, because she doesn't need to prove herself. I am the proof. Silence fell, the kind that clears the static, the kind you feel. Reyes stepped forward. From inside his coat, he pulled a sealed folder. Thick, official, stamped with the crest of the International Institute of Neurological Research. He held it up with steady hands. This, he said, Is the original co-authorship and innovation log time-stamped, signed, and notarized? Filed 10 years ago by Dr. Thomas Monroe. The air shifted, my breath caught my father, the man who never once said, "You were enough," had documented my name next to his when it mattered most. Rays opened the flap, pulled out a page, held it toward the judge. At the bottom, my father's signature, and mine together, in ink that had waited a decade to speak. The courtroom didn't gasp, it exhaled. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. "Dr. Reyes, can you verify authenticity?" "I can," he replied. "And I have the archive reference number from the Geneva Biomedical Ethics Council, if verification is needed. But I'll add something else." He turned, not to the judge, to Julian. "I was there. I watched Leela build what your father could no longer carry. I saw her run the models, interpret the drift, fail, adjust, and try again. Not for recognition, but because that's what real scientists do." Then he looked at me again. "And because daughters don't always need to be named. To be right, but today she will be." Then he turned to the judge, and in a voice that held both grief and pride, said, "I submit this truth, not as testimony, but as correction." The video he never meant to bury. The judge hadn't even finished acknowledging the documents when the clerk rose from her seat. "Your Honor," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "there's another witness. Subpoenaed. She's in the hallway, says it can't wait." The courtroom stilled, the judge blinked. A witness. The doors opened. No uniform, no fanfare. Just a woman in a slate-gray cardigan and practical shoes, clutching a purse like it held more than receipts. She walked slowly, shoulders rounded from years of bending. Not just from work, but from carrying secrets. I knew her before she spoke. Claire Duval, my father's private nurse. The one who disappeared after the funeral. Without saying goodbye, she approached the stand with careful steps, then faced the court. "My name is Claire Duval. I was Dr. Thomas Monroe's home nurse for the last 9 months of his life." Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I'm here because I can't keep quiet anymore." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small flash drive, held it like something sacred. "This is the full video from Dr. Monroe's lab camera. It was recorded 1 week before he died." Julian shifted in his seat. My mother's hand went rigid on the edge of the bench. Claire continued. "I was asked to delete it, paid to delete it, by someone sitting in this room." The judge sat forward. Claire didn't name names. She didn't need to. She placed the drive on the table. "The copy you saw earlier, that was edited. This is the uncut version." The screen flickered to life, grainy, but clear. My father sat slouched at his lab bench, his voice thin but deliberate. "Start the recording, Claire," he said, and then he looked up, straight into the lens. "If this is ever seen, it means I didn't get the chance to say it myself. So here it is." He breathed out hard, that old familiar sigh when his pride fought his truth. "Leela, this is yours, not the enzyme, not the patent, the fire. The work, the why behind it." He coughed, then continued. "You kept going when I couldn't. You carried me when my own son wouldn't return a call." Julian lowered his eyes. "I didn't always show it, but I knew you weren't assisting me. You were replacing me." The screen went dark. No background music, no edit, just truth, raw and unfiltered. The courtroom didn't move, and then Claire spoke once more. "I took the money, but I never cashed the check. Because silence bought with shame isn't peace. It's debt." She turned to me. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted the truth to have its place." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough." And it was. Because in that moment, The lie collapsed under its own weight. The verdict, when silence is enough. The judge recessed for 30 minutes to consider the new evidence. But no one stood, no one whispered. Even the air in the room seemed to sit down beside us. Julian didn't look at me. My mother adjusted her pearls like they still mattered. Claire sat near the back, hands folded like a prayer she wasn't sure would be heard. I didn't pray. I'd stopped doing that when I was 21. After I rewrote the entire enzyme model at 2 a.m. and my father said, then left the room. But I watched the folder. The one Ray's brought. The one with my father's signature. The one that hadn't needed my defense. Just daylight. When the gavel struck again, it was soft, almost apologetic. In light of the new evidence, sworn testimony, and official documentation, the judge began, voice steady. This court recognizes Dr. Leila Monroe as sole legal holder of intellectual property associated with the Monroe synthetase protocol. No cheer, no clapping, just a stillness, heavy, final, sacred. I didn't smile, didn't cry, I just sat there, hands folded, back straight. Same posture I held when they first said I forged my way to the top. But this time, they couldn't take anything from me. Behind me, I heard the soft rustle of fabric. Someone stood. I turned. An older woman in a worn university cardigan, hand over her heart. Then another, and another, former students, lab techs, colleagues of my father, who'd come just to watch the drama, now standing in quiet recognition, not for the verdict, not even for me, but for the choice to stay upright, in a room that tried to erase me. Outside, the reporters surged. Cameras, questions, flashes, I said nothing, not out of pride, but because my silence had already said enough. Epilogue, the room that remembered me. I returned to the lab on a Thursday, not with keys jingling in triumph, not with a press release in hand, just a small bag, and a mind finally still. The lights flickered once when I walked in, as if the room remembered me too. The centrifuge still made that whining startup sound. The whiteboard still had marker stains that wouldn't come off, and in the back corner, the stool where I once sat for 7 hours straight, mapping what my father called impossible noise. I didn't rearrange the equipment, didn't scrub away the old. I just opened a drawer beneath the main bench and placed 2 things inside. 1, the original patent certificate, still warm from the courtroom. 2, a photo of my father, not at a podium, not in a lecture hall, but in our backyard, laughing, sawdust in his hair, holding a broken model rotor, like it was something worth fixing, because some honors aren't meant to be framed, they're meant to be remembered. In the quiet corners of the places we never left, even when no one saw us there. I didn't restart the research that day. I swept the floor, wiped down the pipettes, let the silence settle like sediment. Then I took a piece of lab tape, wrote 5 words, and stuck it on the inside of the cabinet door. Let the data defend you. And I left the lights on, just in case someone else comes in one day, told they're not enough. I want the room to say otherwise, before anyone else does. Some of us aren't built to shout. We're built to stay, to carry the work, the weight, the why, even when no one writes our name on the plaque. If that's you, if you've ever watched someone else take credit while you stayed behind cleaning the glassware, writing the code, holding the pieces together, know this: your silence isn't weakness, it's precision. And one day, it'll speak louder than any headline ever could. So if you've ever been erased quietly, but chose to keep showing up anyway, leave a comment that says, "I let the data defend me, because I see you." And more importantly, the truth always will.